At a family reunion, my 7-year-old adopted daughter was told not to join the family picture because she's not real family. She cried silently all night, even with her father beside her. When I found out, I didn't shout. I did this. 3 hours later, the whole family lost it. My name's Hannah Reed. I'm 36 years old. My morning routine used to be a silent, frantic rush of lukewarm coffee and the blue glow of my laptop screen as I sorted through emails before the sun was even fully awake. Now, it's the sound of small feet padding down the hallway and the 7-year-old voice of my daughter, Zoe, asking with the utmost seriousness if glitter can be considered a food group. Adopting Zoe with my husband, Joel, didn't just change our lives, it gave them a center of gravity we never knew they lacked. Before her, our world was neat, orderly, and a little gray around the edges. Now, it's a whirlwind of scraped knees, whispered secrets about a boy in her class named Leo who can wiggle his ears, and refrigerator doors covered in drawings that always feature 3 stick figures holding hands under a lopsided, smiling sun. Joel, who I once thought was built entirely of logic and spreadsheets, has become fluent in the language of dinosaurs and can, with startling efficiency, build a respectable pillow fort in under 5 minutes. I watch them at the breakfast table, a domestic scene I never thought I'd inhabit. Joel is patiently trying to explain the fundamental physics of why toast can't be dipped in orange juice, and Zoe is listening with a thoughtful frown, as if considering a complex scientific theory. In these moments, a quiet warmth spreads through my chest, a kind of profound peace I didn't even know I was missing. This is the family I chose. The one Joel and I built from hope and paperwork and late-night conversations. It's quiet, it's a little messy with syrup on the counter, and it's undeniably real. The family I was born into, however, operates on a completely different system. It's less about warmth and more about transactions. For the last 8 years, I've been the unofficial and unacknowledged family ATM. A silent partner in everyone else's financial stability. It's a structure built on a foundation of unspoken rules and my quiet compliance. There's the $1,350 I send to my parents, mom and dad, on the first of every month without fail. Dad has always called it a mortgage top-up, a neat little phrase that makes it sound less like a handout and more like a contribution to a shared project. But we all know what it is. It's the payment that keeps the lights on and the worry lines from deepening on their faces. Then there's the $480 for my sister Monica's kids. That money covers piano lessons, summer soccer camp, and advanced karate, activities she insists are essential for their development but which she can't seem to budget for on her own. The requests always come with a veneer of casualness, as if she's just asking to borrow a cup of sugar. I also cover the family phone plan, a $220 bill that somehow includes my parents, Monica, her husband, and 3 cousins I haven't spoken to in over a year. It's an unspoken contract signed in the invisible ink of familial obligation. I provide the financial cushion, and in return I get to wear the mantle of the good daughter, the responsible one. They never ask if I can afford it. They never ask if it's a burden, they just assume I can and that I will, because for 36 years that's been my role. This year my role expanded. I became the sole sponsor of the entire 4-day Reed family reunion. It was my mother's idea, of course, presented as a wonderful opportunity for everyone to reconnect. A lakeside cabin complex with knotty pine walls and a view of the water, a chartered boat cruise for the second afternoon, a fully catered brunch on the final morning, it all went on my credit card. The deposit alone was $9,200. When I first told Mom about our plans to adopt Zoe, her initial reaction wasn't joy. It wasn't a question about the child or my happiness. It was, oh. Well, I hope she's not a picky eater. The catering for the reunion is already set. The words hung in the air between us, cold and practical. Monica was worse. She kept going on and on about tradition and how these reunions were about blood. She'd say it with a brittle little laugh, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Joel noticed it, too. He'd try to share a cute story about Zoe in the family group chat, a picture of her triumphant after learning to tie her shoes, and it would be met with a wall of silence or a quick change of subject from one of my cousins. They treated her like a new accessory I'd acquired, a temporary guest star in my life, not a permanent, central part of it. I kept pushing the feeling down, telling myself it would all be different in person. Once they saw her, once they experienced her infectious laugh and saw the way she looked at the world with such wide-eyed wonder, they'd understand. They'd have to. A last-minute crisis at work, a server crash that required all hands on deck, meant I couldn't leave for the reunion until the next morning. I was crushed. The image of arriving late, of missing that first evening, of settling in, felt like a bad omen. Joel insisted he and Zoe would go on ahead. "We'll hold down the fort," he said, trying to cheer me up. "Save you some of that terrible lime jello casserole my Aunt Carol always brings." His attempt at humor was a small comfort. Zoe was a tiny whirlwind of pure excitement. She'd packed her favorite stuffed bear, a worn-out but much-loved creature named Barnaby, and a brand-new swimsuit with sparkly blue fish that shimmered when they caught the light. In a burst of creative energy, she had spent an entire afternoon making welcome to the family cards for everyone, drawing each person with painstaking 7-year-old detail. I called them that evening just as they were arriving at the resort. Joel said everyone was there, the cabin was nice, and Zoe was already off exploring the edge of the woods with her cousins. Everything sounded normal, almost too normal. There was a slight tightness in Joel's voice, a carefully controlled tension that I registered but chose to ignore. I wanted everything to be fine so badly that I convinced myself it was. My last text to him before I went to bed was, "Make sure Zoe feels included in everything." His reply, a single message that would later haunt me, was just, "Of course." Later, much later, Joel would recount the moment to me, his voice thick and heavy with a shame that felt like a physical weight in the room. The entire family, all 20 of them, had gathered on the wide wooden deck overlooking the lake for the big group photo. It was a tradition my dad insisted on every single year, a formal marking of time and togetherness. The photographer, a local teenager my dad had hired for $50, was arranging everyone by height, a clumsy dance of shuffling and jostling. Zoe, her face beaming with the joy of being part of this big, loud event, tried to squeeze herself into the spot where I would have been standing, right next to Monica's kids. That's when my mother, Linda, stepped forward. She moved with a practiced grace, placing a gentle hand on Zoe's small shoulder, her smile as bright and as hard as a diamond. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet deck, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This picture is just for the real family." Joel said the world just stopped. The chirping of crickets, the lapping of the lake, all of it went silent. He saw Monica's mouth twitch into a small, triumphant smirk. He saw Dad suddenly find something incredibly interesting about the scuffed toes of his shoes. No one, not a single aunt or uncle or cousin, said a word. He froze. Joel, my capable, intelligent husband who is so deeply allergic to conflict, just stood there, outnumbered and paralyzed, as my mother led Zoe off to the side to play with some toys. He said Zoe didn't cry. She didn't make a sound, she just let herself be led away, her shoulders slumping forward, her bright smile gone as if it had been wiped clean off her face. Joel called me at 10 o'clock that night. I was in our bedroom, folding a sweater into my overnight bag, ready to leave at the crack of dawn. His voice was a strained whisper, and I could tell immediately that he was hiding somewhere, probably in a bathroom or a closet. "Something happened," he breathed into the phone. He told me everything about the photo, about my mother's words spoken so sweetly, sharpened to a cruel point. He told me about his own suffocating silence, the way he just stood there and let it happen. "She cried herself to sleep, Hannah," he said, his voice finally cracking, the shame pouring out of him. "She wouldn't even let me hug her, she just laid there in bed, facing the wall, not saying a word." I didn't feel the hot rush of anger I expected. Not at first. What washed over me was a strange, cold calm, a terrible, ringing clarity that felt like a bell tolling deep inside my bones. It was the feeling of 1,000 tiny compromises and swallowed frustrations suddenly snapping into a single, unbendable line. "Put Mom on the phone," I said, my own voice unnervingly steady. He hesitated. I could hear his shallow breathing on the other end. "Just do it, Joel." A moment later, my mother's cheerful, oblivious voice came on the line, asking if I was excited to arrive in the morning. I cut her off. I asked her one simple question. "Did you keep Zoe out of the family photo?" Her pause was the only answer I needed. It was just a second, but it stretched into an eternity filled with every excuse she was scrambling to invent. "Honey, it's complicated," she finally said, her voice shifting into a placating, condescending tone. "It's just tradition. It's a blood-only photo. It always has been." Something inside me, a tightly wound coil of expectation and duty that I had been carrying for 36 years, didn't just break. It turned to dust and blew away. I got in my car and drove. The hum of the engine was the only sound as I cut through the darkness, the miles disappearing under my tires. I arrived at the lakeside resort just after midnight. The main cabin was still lit up, warm yellow light spilling from the windows, the faint sounds of laughter and music drifting into the cool night air. I didn't go in. I just parked in the shadows of the tall pines at the edge of the lot, watching the silhouettes moving in the window. I saw my dad's familiar shape gesturing with a bottle in his hand. I saw Mom, her head thrown back in a laugh. I saw Monica. They were all there, celebrating. They were having a good time, as if nothing had happened. As if a 7-year-old girl wasn't lying in a strange bed in a dark cabin 100 feet away, her heart broken by the people who were supposed to welcome her. I played the scene over and over in my head. I'd walk in, their smiles would falter. They'd tell me I was overreacting. They'd say Zoe was being too sensitive, that it wasn't a big deal. They would call me difficult for daring to have a boundary. They would call me the problem for defending my own child. It would be the same tired, circular argument we'd had 100 times before, just with higher, more devastating stakes. And in that moment, sitting alone in the dark of my car, I realized something with absolute certainty. You don't reason with people who see you as a resource. You just turn off the supply. My fight wouldn't be a loud, dramatic confrontation. It would be an exit. A quiet, permanent financial exit. I stayed in my car, the pale green light of the dashboard illuminating my phone. My hands were steady, my purpose clear. First, I opened my email and found the reservation confirmation for the venue itself, the main lodge and the cabins. My name was on it. My credit card was on it. I scrolled down and found the small blue link. Cancel booking. A pop-up box appeared on the screen asking, "Are you sure all payments are non-refundable?" I didn't hesitate. I tapped confirm. The screen refreshed with a message of cancellation, one string cut. Next, I found the confirmation for the boat cruise scheduled for the next afternoon, a 2-hour tour of the lake complete with drinks and appetizers. I called the 24-hour booking line. A sleepy-sounding operator answered. I gave her my confirmation number and told her I needed to cancel. She didn't even ask why, she just clicked a few keys and said it was done. Another string cut. Finally, the big farewell brunch. I went to the caterer's website and logged into the client portal. I saw the invoice for the elaborate spread marked paid in full. At the bottom of the page was a cancellation button. I clicked it. A small service fee was deducted, but the rest of the considerable sum would be refunded directly to my card. In the space of 5 minutes, sitting in the silence of my car, I had systematically dismantled the entire weekend. The $9,200 weekend they were all enjoying at my expense, on the foundation of my daughter's pain. I felt no satisfaction, no glee, just a quiet, resolute sense of order finally being restored. They wanted a reunion for the real family. Well, now they'd have to pay for it themselves. I wasn't done. The reunion was just the surface. The real problem was the system itself, the deep roots of dependency I had allowed to grow for years. I opened my banking app, the familiar logo glowing on my screen. I navigated to the automated payments section. The transfer of $1,350 to Linda and Frank Reed. Scheduled as always for the first of the month. I swiped left and hit delete. The confirmation was instant. Then the $480 payment to Monica for her kids' endless activities. I stopped it. A pop-up asked for a reason. I typed no longer applicable and moved on. My final stop was my phone provider's website. I was the primary account holder for 6 lines: mine, Joel's, my parents', and Monica and her husband's. I found the Manage Plan page, and one by one I removed every number except for mine and Joel's. A notification popped up on the screen. The other lines will be deactivated within 24 hours unless a new primary account holder is assigned. I almost laughed. Good luck with that. The financial umbilical cord, the one that had nourished their lifestyles at the cost of my own, was severed. Cleanly, completely. Then I opened a new group chat and added my parents and Monica. I didn't add any explanation. There would be no anger, no long paragraphs of my hurt feelings, just a statement of fact. I typed, "If Zoe isn't family, then neither am I." The financial support that comes with being my family ends today. All reunion activities have been canceled. I hit send, then I turned off my phone, the screen going black. I got out of the car, walked to the cabin where Joel and Zoe were, and quietly let myself in. I found Joel asleep in a hard-backed chair he had pulled up next to Zoe's bed, his head slumped against his chest. A silent, guilty sentinel. I gently touched his shoulder and he woke with a start. Without a word, we moved together, a team. I carefully lifted our sleeping daughter from the bed, her small body warm and limp in my arms. She didn't stir. The sheer exhaustion of her silent, private grief had taken over completely. We carried her out to my car, wrapped her in a blanket in the back seat, and drove away from the lakeside resort without a single look back. An hour later, we were in a 24-hour diner that smelled of stale coffee, bacon, and disinfectant. It felt like a sanctuary. We slid into a cracked vinyl booth under the buzzing fluorescent lights, and I ordered a giant plate of pancakes for Zoe for when she woke up. I told Joel everything I had done. The cancellations, the stopped payments, the text message. He just listened and nodded, his face a complex mixture of profound relief and raw fear. "I should have done something," he kept saying, his voice low and ragged. "I'm so sorry, Hannah, I just froze." "We're doing something now," I replied, my voice firm. "We're choosing her right now. That's all that matters." When Zoe finally woke up, her eyes blinking in confusion at the strange surroundings, she saw the plate of pancakes with a smiley face made of whipped cream. She looked at me, then at Joel, and a tiny, fragile smile touched her own lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. In that moment, watching her carefully cut a small piece of pancake with her fork, I knew with every fiber of my being that I had made the right choice. My family wasn't in that lakeside cabin laughing. It was right here in this sticky, brightly lit booth. Around 9 o'clock the next morning, after 2 cups of terrible diner coffee, I decided it was time. I took a deep breath and turned my phone back on. It didn't just vibrate, it felt like it was going to explode. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications, dozens of missed calls from my parents and Monica. A flood of text messages, each one more frantic than the last. "Mom, Hannah, this isn't funny. The venue says our booking is canceled. The manager was very rude. Call me immediately." "Dad, what is going on? People are waiting for the boat." "This is embarrassing." And then there was Monica. "Are you insane? My phone just got shut off. I can't believe how selfish you're being. You're ruining everything over nothing." The word nothing seemed to burn on the screen. I decided to listen to just one voicemail. It was from my mother. Her voice wasn't warm or concerned. It was high-pitched and frantic, stripped of all its usual composure. "I don't understand what this is about, but you have made a huge mistake. You are humiliating this entire family in front of everyone. You need to fix this right now." There was no apology, no mention of Zoe. No flicker of concern for why I might have done this. Just pure, unadulterated anger that their free, meticulously planned vacation had been interrupted. Their panic was the only confirmation I needed. They didn't miss me. They didn't miss my presence or my love. They missed what I provided. I placed the phone face down on the sticky table. They hit the locked doors, I told Joel. He simply took a sip of his coffee and nodded. Just as I was about to silence my phone for good, a single text came through from a number I didn't expect. My cousin Danny, who was Monica's younger, quieter sister. The text was short. It just said, "I'm so sorry, Hannah. You deserve so much better. I think you needed to see this." Below the words was a screenshot. It was from a group chat titled Read Family Fun, a chat I was, of course, not a part of. My eyes scanned the messages, my heart turning to a block of ice in my chest. They were from the week before the reunion. "Monica, so for the big family pic, are we letting the new kid in it? Might be weird, Mom. Let's stick to blood only for the main one on the deck. We can take a separate one with her later if Hannah insists." Dad, agreed, let's just keep it simple, less drama. And then the final, chilling message from Monica, perfect. "Only blood in the frame." My mother had replied to that specific message, not with words but with a single, cheerful red heart emoji, an endorsement, a stamp of approval. It wasn't a slip-up on the deck. It wasn't an impulsive, thoughtless comment made in the heat of the moment. It was a plan. They had discussed it, they had agreed on it, and they had executed it with chilling precision. They had premeditated the exclusion of my daughter. They had conspired to wound a 7-year-old girl to reinforce their own twisted sense of order. The screen blurred in front of my eyes, not from tears, but from a rage so pure and cold it felt like it could crack glass. My phone rang again. The screen showed Danny's name. I answered it, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice rushed and quiet as if she was afraid of being overheard. "I wanted to say something in the moment, Hannah, but they all, you know how they are." "You did say something, Danny. You sent the text." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "It's more than anyone else did." There was a pause on the line, a hesitation that made my skin prickle. "There's something else," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "I don't know if I should say anything. It's really not my business, but, Danny, whatever it is, just tell me." I overheard your dad on the phone with your mom a few weeks ago," she said, stumbling over the words. "He was talking about some money troubles, that his contracting business lost a big client and things were tight." "He didn't tell me that," I said, a cold pit forming in my stomach. "Dad never talked about business failures, only successes." "I know," she said, "because he said not to worry because he'd handled it. He was bragging a little. He said he got a personal loan and that it was easy because he used Hannah's good name." The words didn't compute at first. They felt like a foreign language. "Used my name? What does that mean?" Danny took a shaky breath. I think they took out a loan, Hannah, and I think they signed your name on it." The background noise of the diner, the clatter of plates, the low murmur of conversation faded into a dull roar in my ears. I could only hear Danny's voice, hesitant but brutally clear. "They were talking about a business line of credit they couldn't get," she explained, the story tumbling out now. "The bank turned them down. But your dad said a personal loan was easier to get approved for. He said they used your information, your income from your job, your credit score, everything to get it approved." My mind was scrambling, trying to make sense of the logistics. How could they possibly do that without me knowing? I would have had to sign things. I think they did it all online," Danny whispered. "Your dad is good with computers. He probably just forged an electronic signature. I heard him say something about how the bank wouldn't even question it because you were always paying for everything anyway. They just saw it as more of the same." The logic was so twisted, so profoundly selfish, it almost made a perverse kind of sense. In their world, my finances were their finances. My good name, my years of responsible work, it was all just another asset for them to leverage and exploit. "How much, Danny?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Did you hear how much?" She was quiet for a long, terrible moment. "I heard him say the number to your mom," she finally said. "He said it was $45,000. $45,000. A number so large it felt unreal. A betrayal so deep and so calculated it stole the very air from my lungs. I thanked Danny, my voice a hollow echo of itself, and hung up the phone. Joel was staring at me from across the table, his face pale. "What is it? What's wrong?" I told him. I watched the disbelief in his eyes slowly curdle into the same cold, quiet fury that was solidifying in my own gut. This was no longer about hurt feelings or family drama. This wasn't about a photograph or a cruel comment. This was fraud. This was a crime. They hadn't just disrespected my daughter, they had stolen my identity. They had gambled with my financial future, with the security Joel and I had worked so hard to build, assuming I would be their silent, unknowing safety net forever. The thought of them laughing in that lakeside cabin, celebrating a weekend paid for with my money while my name was attached to their secret, fraudulent debt, was utterly galvanizing. The last lingering shred of hesitation in me, the final ghost of familial obligation, vanished. There was no going back from this. There would be no making peace. There would be no forgiveness. They hadn't just crossed a line. They had proven, with breathtaking arrogance, that for them there was no line they wouldn't cross when it came to using me. My commitment was no longer just about protecting my daughter's feelings. It was about protecting our entire future from the people who felt so utterly entitled to it. I didn't call them. I didn't scream or rage or demand an explanation. I acted. Sitting right there in the sticky vinyl booth of the diner, I called my bank. I asked to be put through to the fraud department. A calm, professional woman named Sharon answered, and I explained in a voice that was eerily steady that I believed a significant loan had been taken out in my name without my consent. Sharon didn't question me. She took the information, asked a few clarifying questions, and told me she was flagging the account and opening an immediate investigation. There was a seriousness in her tone that validated the severity of what I was feeling. After I hung up with her, I opened my email. I composed a new message to my parents and my sister. The subject line was short and to the point. The $45,000 loan. The body of the email was just as lean, stripped of all emotion, a simple statement of consequences. I have been made aware of a $45,000 personal loan taken out in my name without my knowledge or consent. I have already notified the bank's fraud department. I continued, "You have 10 business days to have my name removed from this debt and to assume full legal and financial responsibility for it." I paused, my finger hovering over the keyboard before typing the final sentence. "If it is not resolved by then, my next step will be to file a formal police report for identity theft and fraud." I signed it simply, Hannah Reed. I hit send. This was my irreversible choice. The war wasn't going to be loud, but it had just begun. 2 days later, they showed up at our house. They didn't call first, of course. That would have implied they needed permission. My dad's dusty work truck rumbled into our driveway and all 3 of them got out, Mom, Dad, and Monica. My mother was carrying a lopsided grocery store bakery cake in a clear plastic container. Condensation was running down the sides, making the pink frosting roses look like they were weeping. It was the saddest-looking peace offering I had ever seen. I met them at the front door before they could even ring the bell. I didn't invite them in, I just stood there, my body a barrier in the doorway. "Hannah, we need to talk," my dad said, attempting the firm, fatherly tone that no longer had any effect on me. It was like a key to a lock I had changed. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice flat and cool. "Did you fix the loan? We can fix everything if you just stop this nonsense and let us in," my mom said, holding up the melting cake as if it were a magical key that could undo the last 72 hours. "The answer is no, you're not welcome in my home," I stated, the words feeling both foreign and liberating. Monica scoffed from behind them, a sound of pure theatrical disbelief. "Oh my God, you're really going to do this? After everything we've done for you?" The sheer, inverted logic of her question, the absolute audacity of it, was almost breathtaking. They immediately fell back on the old script. It was as if they'd been rehearsing it their whole lives and a single angry text had finally given them permission to perform. First, denial. Dad waved his hand like the whole thing was a mosquito on a warm night. "The loan was just a temporary thing," he said, puffing his chest up in a way that used to make me feel safe as a kid. A misunderstanding, we were trying to handle some bills. Mom jumped in with the minimizing, the same soft tone she used when a scraped knee was really just a little scratch. The photo thing was blown way out of proportion, she said, as if exclusion could be softened into an accident. Monica didn't mean it like that, you know how she is. They rearranged memory like furniture, moving the ugly truth into a closet and closing the door. Then came the blame shifting. They turned the story on me like a magician pulling a scarf from thin air. You always make everything so complicated, Monica accused, leaning on the porch railing with an eyebrow raised. You're always looking for drama, Mom folded her hands, eyes wide and wounded. We're your family, Hannah, she said, that old gospel of obligation. You don't just throw away your family. Think about what you're teaching that little girl. Their words were practiced, polished. They knew exactly how to cut, to make me doubt myself, to make me imagine the worst-case version of their story so I'd fold. But the part that gutted me, the line that told me everything I needed to know about how they'd been thinking of me, came from Monica with a careless, almost bored inflection. Honestly, she said, as if admitting to a preference was nothing at all, life was so much smoother and easier for everyone before Zoe came along. There it was, the quiet confession they never intended to make public. Zoe was not a person to them, she was a complication, a bargaining chip, a disruption to their free access to my time and money. They didn't see that a child might learn and hurt and grow, they saw a loss. A withdrawal from the service they were used to. For a second I felt the old tug, the habit, the pull toward trying to smooth things over. I could have given them another explanation, another compromise. I could have promised to be more careful with my boundaries. The history of my life was full of those concessions. But as Monica's words hung in the air, ugly and naked, every memory of being used flickered through me. The calls at midnight asking for bailouts, the casual assumptions that I would fix things, the small betrayals hidden in everyday favors. That pattern wasn't a mistake, it was a system. And systems only change when someone refuses to play along. Joel, who'd been standing just inside the doorway watching the scene unfold, stepped forward. For a long time, he'd been the one to make peace, to smooth the rough edges between me and the people who loved me with conditions. Tonight, something in him shifted. He stopped being the man who hoped to avoid waves and became the man who would stand in front of them. You hurt our daughter, he said, his voice low but steady, and suddenly I felt less alone. You sat there and decided she didn't belong in a family photo. You made a 7-year-old child feel invisible on purpose. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The words landed like stones on quiet water. My parents blinked, and Monica's scoff faded into a puzzled, exposed silence. You're right, he continued, turning his attention from Mom and Dad to Monica. Life was easier for you when my wife was available to bail you out. Easier when you didn't have to think about other people's problems because hers were always solved. But it's not our job to be someone else's comfort. He put a hand on my back, a simple gesture that felt like armor. You used her, you stole from her, and you blamed the person who refused to be used anymore. Dad opened his mouth, started to preen some excuse about obligations and sacrifices. Joel didn't let him finish. The 10 days are real, he said, and this time his tone left no room for bargaining. You have 10 days to fix what you're responsible for. If you don't, we'll take it further. His eyes were clear. He was done being indecisive. He stepped forward close enough to be a barrier between me and them, and then he did something I hadn't expected. He turned to me. I'm sorry I froze, he said softly. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. That stops now. I'm part of this family too, and I'm not watching you hurt our kid. It was the last push they needed to turn tail. They looked suddenly smaller, like actors realizing the audience had seen the wires. The cake sat forgotten on the hood of Dad's truck, sweating into a sticky puddle. They shuffled away, muttering something about how they'd make it right. I watched them go and felt a complex knot of relief and sorrow untie inside me. Joel closed the door gently, and then he did something practical. He sat at his laptop, eyes focused and intent. He booked our first appointment with a family counselor for next week, a quiet admission that we were willing to do the work to heal the damage they had caused, but only on our terms. He wasn't just saying sorry. He was taking steps. For the first time since this all began, I felt like I had a partner who would stand up with me, not wait for the storm to pass. A few days later, Aunt Denise called. I knew Denise's voice, soft, cautious, the kind that always punctuated sentences like she was testing the water. She asked if she could come by, and when she arrived, she looked like someone who'd carried a secret for a very long time. In her hand, she held an envelope, the kind that browns with age and holds more than paper. It held history. She sat down across from me, eyes flicking to the window as if checking for someone lurking in the yard. I should have given this to you years ago, she said, folding her hands over the envelope like it was something fragile. But Frank and Linda, they made it very clear I was to keep my mouth shut. They treated it like it wasn't mine to decide. She swallowed, and for the first time I noticed the tremor in her voice. Denise had always been the family member who didn't like to make waves. Seeing her now, somber and resolute, told me this couldn't be small news. Denise told me that just before Grandma Margot died, she had pulled Denise aside. They'd had some sort of quiet, conspiratorial talk that Denise had been sworn to keep. Grandma loved you, Denise said simply, and then opened her palm so I could take the envelope. She gave this to me with instructions. She said, if you ever needed reminding of who you are, if you ever needed to know there was someone who saw what you gave, then I was to give you this. The envelope was light, but it felt heavy in my hands. On the front, in my grandmother's old, shaking script, were the words, "For my Hannah." Denise hesitated before she left, as if the act of giving the letter was an apology in itself. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have told you sooner. I was afraid of what Frank would do, how Linda would react, but you're not alone, Hannah, not all of us are like them." She hugged me, the kind of hug that doesn't demand anything in return, and then she went back to her car. The envelope sat on my kitchen table like a small, sleeping thing, waiting for me to wake it up. I sat on the porch swing that evening, the envelope warm from my hands, and finally opened it. The paper inside smelled faintly of lavender, Grandma's perfume, and the handwriting was curvy and sure, the kind of script that belonged to someone who'd written letters by hand her whole life. She began with the small things, the gentle memories. How she'd once watched me tie my shoes, and later she watched me take care of neighbors' kids. Then her voice, across a decade and 1,000 small moments, leaned in and spoke directly to the thing they were trying to erase. "I see adoption as a blessing," she had written plainly, "not because it replaces anything, but because it adds to what we have. Blood is a detail of biology. Love is the only thing that makes a family." Reading those words felt like someone turning a light on in a room I've always been told was dim. She wrote about a sister she had loved who'd been adopted into their family years before, and how that sister had given her joys that blood relations hadn't. She wrote about how family was a verb, an action you chose every day, and how she admired my capacity to choose. Then, like a hand reaching into the back of a drawer and handing me a coin I didn't know I owned, she mentioned a gift. "To make sure your future is your own," Grandma had written, "I've left you an education bond at the bank. It's not a fortune, but it's a start, $12,000 to be used for any child you call your own." She went on to explain, in simple sentences, that she wanted something to be a foundation for whomever I might love and raise. The exact details, an account number and the bank name were there, written in that same steady hand. It felt like a validation I didn't know I needed, a piece of my grandmother's heart folded into paper and ink. My first reaction was disbelief, then a rush of saudade so large my eyes watered. How many small kindnesses had been hidden from me, how much had they kept? The letter proved that my grandmother saw what Mom and Dad refused to admit. That love wasn't about whether you shared DNA, it proved someone in my family had been on my side. It felt like a warm hand on the back of my head, steadying me, but there was a bitter twist too. If Mom and Dad had access to my grandmother's papers as executors, they must have known about this bond. They must have known that the woman who built our home valued chosen family as much as she valued blood. They'd hidden it from me for years. Holding that letter, feeling the paper between my fingers, I realized the wound in my chest had widened into a clean, white space. It hurt, but it cleared something too. The truth wasn't only that they'd excluded Zoe. It was that for years they'd been cutting away my options, my independence, the very ideas that might have let me walk away sooner. Grandma Margot's words were a lifeline now, proof that there had always been someone who believed in my right to choose who I called family. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. The neat little radio of my family's life, practical, polite, dependable, had always been playing the same selfish station, and Grandma's letter was the first thing to tune to a different frequency. If Mom and Dad had been the ones handling Grandma Margot's estate, they would have had access to every scrap of paper, every account, every instruction. They'd known about the education bond. They'd known, in black and white, that she believed adoption was a blessing and that she'd set aside money for any child Hannah calls her own. 10 years of hidden hope, tucked away like an extra sweater in a closet they never let me open. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces clicked together. Mom's flippant comment about the catering the day I told her about Zoe. The way they'd always shifted beds and budgets around when a bill came due, assuming I'd patch the hole. Not just lazy or thoughtless, careful. They hadn't just been taking from me in the moment, they'd been trimming away the things that might let me walk away. A small sum here, a withheld letter there. Keep the daughter dependent, keep her grateful, keep her accessible. If Grandma Margot's words had been known, they would have undercut the whole system. A $12,000 bond might not have been enough to buy freedom, but it would have been a seed. It would have made it harder for them to pretend I had no options. It's a dull, enraging kind of grief, realizing someone you trusted planned your limits for you. The letter had been a lifeline and they'd cut it. Their hiding of it wasn't a slip or a mistake, it was a choice to keep me small. And when you add that to the way they'd talked about Zoe, the group chat messages, the photo on purpose, you weren't dealing with a single cruel instance. You were facing a pattern, a whole economy built on my compliance. Anger is heavy, but it cleared things up. It made the next steps obvious. If they had been so willing to misuse my name to get what they wanted and so willing to hide a gift meant for my future, then everything about the family I'd known needed re-examining. I sat on the porch swing with the letter in my lap until my hands were numb, feeling both lighter and more alone than I had in years. They didn't try to fix anything quietly. When their attempt to guilt me back into the old roles failed, they went louder and darker. It started with calls to relatives I hadn't spoken to since weddings and funerals, Aunt June, Uncle Pete, cousins who knew me only as the dependable sister who always answered. The story they told was neat and rehearsed. Hannah had snapped, they said. She'd become unstable, adopted a child, and suddenly she was someone else. Joel was controlling her. She was trying to extort them over a silly disagreement about a photograph. It was a masterpiece of omission. They never mentioned the loan. They didn't mention the screenshot where Mom had heart-eyed Monica's "only blood in the frame" message. They didn't mention the way my name had been used like a tool. Instead, they painted me as unreasonable, as the source of a family crisis for no good reason. A cousin I barely knew called and without any of the facts said I needed to learn to forgive. An aunt who used to call me on my birthday left a voicemail that sounded coached. "We're worried about you, Hannah," she said. "You always put family first, maybe you need time to think." They used our shared language, family, forgiveness, duty as a sword. My phone became a noisy, accusing thing. Texts arrived in a steady stream. "Have you lost your mind? Think about the kids. What example are you setting? You're throwing away your family over a photo." One message had half a dozen forwarding addresses copied in like a press release. Someone had included a vague, badly written note about Hannah's recent behavior. I felt the old habits flicker in me: defend, explain, apologize. It's a reflex that's been trained into you when you're the one who keeps the peace, who smooths over rifts by swallowing your own edges. For a moment, it was almost persuasive. Maybe I had overreacted, maybe I'd been too harsh, maybe Joel and I had made a mistake that could be fixed with a simple phone call. Then I thought about the way Zoe had curled around herself on that cabin bed, how she'd let herself be led away from a group photo like her presence was a mistake. The thought of her internalizing that message forever was unbearable. That little voice inside me that had always put other people first fell silent under the sound of her small, brave breaths. For a single, terrifying afternoon, I almost buckled. The pressure of being cut off from the world you grew up in is like a physical thing. It presses in through the skin. The messages cut off the edges of the week until my whole life felt smaller, the rooms in the house shrinking. I found myself pacing the living room, the same route my feet have always taken when I'm thinking hard, around the couch, past the houseplants Joel keeps insisting will survive if he remembers to water them. I picked up my phone to call Mom, to tell her I was sorry, to beg for us to be a family again. But then Zoe climbed up on the couch and curled next to me. She dug her small fingers into the fabric of my sweater like she hadn't fully trusted the world at all but had decided I was safe anyway. Her hair smelled faintly of the lake and sunscreen. She pushed her face against my shoulder and asked something so simple and so painful that all the practiced responses I had rehearsed dissolved. "Are Grandma and Grandpa still mad because I'm not real family?" she asked. Her voice was small, like she was testing the air, afraid her question might be too heavy for me to carry. It hit me in the chest like a fist. I remembered being that small, waiting for an adult to tell me whether I was wanted. I thought of every time Mom had spoken over me, every time Dad had treated my decisions like inconveniences, every small, sugar-coated way they'd taught me to accept less than I deserved. For a second everything blurred, my childhood, the pancake-smeared afternoons with Zoe, the letter in my hands with Grandma's ink fading like a lighthouse in fog. My head was full of old voices. "You're being dramatic, this will pass, family always forgives." But there was another, newer voice that had been growing steady in me since the moment I held Zoe for the first time. She was more fierce and quieter than the others. She said, in no uncertain terms, that it was my job to make sure Zoe never had to doubt her place because adults were selfish. All my doubt evaporated. It left room for something clearer and colder. "This isn't about whether I'm right or wrong. This is about making sure a child goes to bed knowing she belongs. No lecture, no explanation, no negotiated return. Safe, wanted, chosen." I looked down at Zoe and smiled, the kind of small, stubborn smile that says, "I have you." I smoothed her hair back from her forehead, feeling the soft scrape of a faint scar where she'd fallen last week. "No," I said. "Grandma and Grandpa are just being mean, but you are mine, you're our family." She nodded, trust settling on her like a blanket. I could see the tension easing out of her shoulders. For the first time in days, she looked like a child who didn't carry an invisible weight. That was when I knew what I had to do next. If I was going to protect her, I had to stop hoping our old family would change and start building the family that actually showed up. I picked up my phone, but I didn't type a message to Mom or Dad. I didn't call Monica to make it right. I opened a new text and sent it to Aunt Denise and Danny first, because Denise had already shown she was willing to be honest, and Danny had been brave enough to send me the screenshot. A minute later, I added Sarah from next door, the woman who brought over casseroles when her kids were sick and who'd once babysat Zoe for an afternoon when I had a meeting. I added a few neighbors whose kids played with Zoe and a couple of other friends I trusted not to show up out of obligation but out of love. The message was short because it had to be. Long explanations would give room for doubt and second-guessing, and I didn't have time for either. "I'm realizing family is about who shows up," I typed. "I'm taking a new family photo this Saturday at the park at 2. No pressure at all, but if you want to be in it, we'd love to have you." Hitting send felt like dropping a pebble into a wide, dark pond. There was a tremor of fear. What if no one came? What if this gamble landed me and Zoe even further out in the cold? But there was also a tiny, stubborn flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the people who truly mattered would show. Maybe the people who had a claim on our lives would be the ones who appeared without being asked, who brought cookies not to fix anything but to say, "We see you. We choose you." After I sent the messages, I made a cup of tea I didn't have time to finish. Then I sat on the floor with Zoe and Joel and spread our hands, making tiny paper puppets with her. We practiced standing together. Her hand in mine, Joel's hand on my shoulder, the way to angle so the sun didn't make us squint. It was a small ritual, silly and ordinary, and that was its power. It wasn't about proving anything to Mom and Dad. It was about teaching Zoe in the simplest language she could understand that she belonged where she was loved. I went to bed that night dizzy with a kind of dangerous peace. The phone still buzzed sometimes with calls I didn't pick up, but a different sound had settled over the house, the quiet, sure breathing of the little family I had chosen. The next few days were a wait, and waiting is loud when your whole history has taught you to measure worth in availability and sacrifice. But the invite was out there now, a small, bright thing, and whether anyone showed up or not, I had taken the first step off the hurtful treadmill I'd been running on for so long. It was day 10. The folder on the passenger seat felt heavier than the papers inside it. The bank email, Danny's screenshot, Grandma Margot's letter, everything I needed to prove I wasn't making this up was there, neat and ridiculous in its quiet authority. I had the police station's address saved in my phone, the number of the fraud investigator we'd been talking to, and a calm I didn't entirely recognize as my own. I was about to pull out of the driveway when my phone started ringing. Caller ID lit up with Dad's name. I let it go to voicemail the first time. He called again immediately. This time I answered and put him on speaker while I kept one hand on the steering wheel. "Hannah, don't," he said before I could say anything. His voice was thin, stripped of the smugness he usually wrapped himself in. I could hear Mom in the background, half sob, half hiss, the sounds of someone who'd been frightened into theater. "Please, honey, we can talk. We fixed it. We fixed it." "It's done, Dad," I said. My voice surprised me with how calm it sounded. "The 10 days are over. We're on our way over. Just give us 5 minutes. We'll show you." He was pleading, and I heard the panic under his words. It wasn't for me. It was for himself, being caught, being held accountable, the sudden loss of a safety net they'd assumed I'd be forever. "You have 5 minutes," I said. "I'm waiting on the porch." I shut the car off and sat for a moment with the quiet, feeling the cool air move across the paper in my lap. The porch felt smaller and cleaner than it had 10 days ago. I thought of Zoe, asleep under a blanket in our house, breathing without the knot that had tightened around her chest for days. I thought of the way Joel had stood beside me when Mom and Dad had come a few nights before, how his hand on my back had felt like a vote. This wasn't theater for me, it was protection. When they pulled into the driveway, they looked older than they had a week ago. The truck's tailgate was still down and the cake box sat warm on the seat. Dad held a single sheet of paper in his hand like a talisman, the letter from the bank confirming that the loan had indeed been transferred out of my name and secured against their home. "See," Mom said, voice wobbling, "it's done. We fixed it." I wanted to feel relief, I wanted to fold, but the folder in the car reminded me of all the other things they'd hidden, every small theft of choice. I opened the door and stepped out. The late morning sun made Mom squint. She clutched that paper like proof of a bargain kept. Monica hovered, arms folded, looking like a woman trying to remember which mask fit best for the audience. "You're asking me to accept this as an apology," I said, my voice even. "You want me to take the paper and go back to being the daughter you can use?" Dad's mouth opened and closed. "Hannah, we made a mistake," he started. "We panicked. Mistakes are accidents," I cut in. "What you did was planned. You decided together to keep my grandmother's gift from me. You talked about excluding a 7-year-old from a family photo, and then you did it. You took my name and used it to get $45,000. Those weren't mistakes, those were choices." They stood there without their practiced answers. Mom's hand went to her mouth as if to stop a word from tumbling out. Monica tried the old tactic, blame the reaction, not the action. "You're making this into something bigger than it is," she said. "You overreacted. This wasn't about a picture, I said. I felt the words settle like stones on the grass. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. The truth has its own weight. For years, I thought your silence, your requests, your needs were love. I thought it was just complicated. But the more I look, the more I see it's transactional. You love what I do for you, you love what I give you. You don't know how to love a person when there's no return. Dad's face changed then, not with shame, but with fear, the thin, white fear of someone realizing they've pushed too far and the wiring snapped. "We're your family," he said, voice small. "We're sorry, Hannah, we are." "Sorry doesn't undo the choices you've made," I replied. "It doesn't put back what you hid from me. And it doesn't fix the fact that you plan to make my daughter feel like she doesn't belong the moment I stopped being available to you in the way you wanted." Mom began to cry then, but they were the kind of tears that sound like anger when they come out. Not remorse, not recognition. She wiped at her face, frustrated and sharp. "You don't understand how hard it's been," she said. "You left us no choice." "You made a choice for us," I said. "You made the choice to use my name. You made the choice to hide what Grandma wanted me to have. You made the choice to decide who was real enough to be in our family photo. Those are your choices. I'm done compensating for them." Monica opened her mouth as if to argue, but Joel stepped forward, his presence a quiet wall. "They didn't just hurt you," he said, eyes on Dad. "They hurt our child. There's no repairing that by waving a paper around." His voice was steady and I felt my shoulders loosen a little. He had booked a counselor. He'd shown up at my side when it counted. Dad's shoulders drooped and he dropped the sheet of paper almost as if it suddenly got too heavy to hold. The awkward answer they'd been practicing left them. They tried one last move, the oldest trick, appeal to the image of unity. "Families forgive," Dad said, almost pleading. "Forgiveness is a choice," I said, "and so is trust. You broke both. If you want to earn them back, it won't be because I take a sheet of paper and pretend everything's the same." I felt a final clarity in that moment, like the click of a lock. You have choices to make too. You can choose accountability. You can choose to rebuild without assuming I'll be the landlord for your mistakes, or you cannot, but I'm not going to be in the middle anymore. They left then, the cake still sweating in the car, footsteps heavy. I watched them go, feeling the hush of the yard rearrange itself around the absence of their demands. I stood on the porch and let the sun warm my face. I felt tired but steadier than I'd been in years. As Dad's truck turned the corner, a car pulled up at the curb. A little bouquet, a box of cookies, 2 kids running ahead, Aunt Denise, Danny, Sarah, and others who had shown up because they wanted to. They spilled onto the lawn like color into a black and white photograph. Denise handed me the flowers with a gentle, apologetic smile. Danny hugged me so tight I could feel the tremble in her throat. The neighbor's kids ran to Zoe, who stood frozen for a second, then smiled like someone who had been given permission to be happy. My parents and Monica watched from the road, their faces small and remote. I didn't look back. I turned on my heel and walked toward the small gathering. Joel had set up a tripod and his old camera, the one he used when he tried to pretend he was an artist. He showed me the screen and we arranged ourselves, Zoe in the center, me holding her hand, Joel's arm around my shoulders. Denise stood on one side, Danny on the other. Sarah's kids jumped into the frame like they owned the moment. The air smelled of cut grass and summer lemonade, and there was a soft, ridiculous joy in the way sunlight skated across everyone's hair. I said what I'd been meaning to say since the deck. "You taught me a valuable lesson. Family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by who shows up, who protects, who keeps a child safe. If you decide you can't be that, that's on you." I walked into the circle and felt something settle in my chest like a knot finally untied. I didn't watch my parents drive away. I didn't need to see their faces anymore. I looked through the camera lens at the faces around me, worn and imperfect but present, and felt a fierce sort of gratitude. We adjusted, laughed at a child who refused to say cheese, smoothed rumpled shirts, brushed a strand of hair from Zoe's forehead. The camera clicked. It was a small, simple sound, a kind of punctuation. When we reviewed the photo on the screen, Zoe's grin was wide and real. Her eyes shone with a trust that belonged to a girl who had been chosen enough times to believe it. My throat tightened, not with anger now, but with relief. This picture wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about recording the fact that she belonged to us and to everyone in that circle. After we packed up, I taped the photo on the living room wall by the door. Every time I pass it, I see the way Zoe's hand fits into mine and how the people who mattered stood with us. The new family photo didn't erase the past. It didn't heal every wound. It was, though, a promise I could keep. In our house, no one gets cropped out of the frame. It's been a year. The quiet that followed our choice has settled into a steady, ordinary background hum, less dramatic than I imagined, but heavier in ways that matter. I hear about things instead of being in the middle of them. Aunt Denise calls sometimes with small news. She told me Monica's boutique, the one that had been kept afloat by small loans and late payments and my willingness to cover gaps, closed 6 months after everything went quiet. The money that used to flood their account every month dried up. The business couldn't survive the slow drip of missing income. It felt strange and oddly clean to hear it from Denise, who always sounds like she's apologizing for existing. Mom and Dad both took jobs. Mom works evenings at a department store now, folding sweaters under fluorescent lights and learning a new shift routine at 60. Dad drives for a ride-sharing service on weekends, which he hates but says helps put food on the table. Hearing that hurt in a way I didn't expect. There's consequence in choices. They sent a Christmas card last year. It was the plain kind from a pharmacy aisle, signed "Love, Mom and Dad" with no note. I didn't reply. I don't know what would have been said. An apology, an explanation, a promise to change. The houseplants didn't need more paper. The silence felt like more than absence. It felt like a decision that had finally caught up with them. We stopped the money that fed their convenience. The $1,350 I used to send Mom and Dad now goes into a savings bucket for small emergencies that belong to us. The $480 for Monica's kids goes into Zoe's account. The phone plan money I used to cover, it pays for our internet and a better used laptop for Joel's work. The money that used to be their safety net now stitches holes in our own house, literally. We found a leak in the roof last spring that we'd been putting off. We finally fixed it without the half-finished promises that used to fill our calendar. We don't have the constant background hum of debts we didn't agree to anymore. And Grandma Margot's $12,000, thank God for her and Denise and the letter. It's in Zoe's education fund now, earning its small, steady piece of future. It makes me breathe differently when I look at that account. It isn't enough to buy every option, but it's a seed, and seeds matter. We add to it every month with money that used to vanish into other people's choices. There's a small, concrete relief in that, a number that is for her, for us, and only ours. There are costs. I still feel phantom guilt sometimes, the ghost of being the daughter who used to say yes. Old habits don't die overnight. I get flashes, an urge to answer a call from Mom to fix some imagined problem before it grows, to pick up the slack. Those feelings come like muscle memory. They last for a minute and then go when I look at Zoe playing in the yard or when Joel handles bedtime without flinching. The guilt isn't gone, but it's getting quieter. Mostly it's replaced by a steady, surprising joy. This morning was like most now. Zoe asked for pancakes at 7, barricaded herself at the counter while Joel and I debated chocolate chips, and the house smelled like browned butter and syrup. She marched into the kitchen with bare feet, hair still sticking out from sleep, and announced that after pancakes we could go to the park to play with our people. She doesn't say our people as a tiny, careful test anymore. She says it with full confidence, the way kids say facts that are obvious to them. That confidence has changed everything. On the living room wall there's a large, framed photograph we took the summer after the reunion. The sun is a warm smear behind us. Zoe's face is the exact center, wide grin, missing a front tooth. Joel's arm is around my shoulders, and Denise and Danny and Sarah and their kids cluster in the frame like punctuation marks. It's messy and bright and real. When I pass it, I feel a small, steady warmth, Not a triumphal shout, not a victory lap, just a quiet fact: these are the people who showed up. We talk often about what family means. Joel keeps showing up for counseling on nights he used to avoid conflict. He listens, he learns, he apologizes when he needs to. Danny and Denise visit more. Some cousins reached out and quietly rearranged how they think about the old rules. Others stayed silent, and I stopped measuring our lives against their silence. There are moments when I miss the easy rhythm of things, even those moments I know were built on my exhaustion. I miss how Mom used to braid my hair when I was little, the way Dad used to smile at my drawings. Those memories are safe. They belong to my private life and don't have to excuse the things they did. I've learned that compassion for my past doesn't require forgiving the harm without accountability. If you've ever had to choose your child's safety over the comforting shape of family, you're not alone. Tell your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss future stories. Thank you for listening and for choosing to be here with us.